Hello, thank you for joining me for 2nd Samuel in summer. Today is Saturday, June 12th, and this is the 12th chapter of the second book of Samuel. In the 12th chapter, we have probably one of my favorite sections of scripture, followed by 3 additional sections of scripture. Now, 3 of the 4 total are related. The last is just a little bit of another conquering that happens. So, in the very beginning, we have the prophet Nathan. Now, we've had Nathan before. He wasn't really introduced, he just sort of emerged as the new spokesperson for God and then a go between for David and God, because David used to go straight to God, and then we have Nathan coming in. So the Lord is displeased, to say the least. And it's important that we mark the day, because up to this point, David has not caused the Lord any displeasure. He has been consistently a man after God's own heart. But in taking the wife of another man, he has committed adultery, and he has gone against the commandments of the Lord, against the covenant. And so the Lord, in his displeasure, sends Nathan to tell David a parable about a man who was very wealthy and had many livestock, and another man who had one single solitary little ewe, and he loved it like it was his child. And even though the neighbor was very rich and had many different lambs and oxen and whatever else, the rich man took the man's precious lamb and served it to his friends. And David was outraged by this story. And then Nathan, looking into his heart, says, "The man is you." And then he goes on to describe how David will be punished. His wives will be taken out in public. And you did this thing with Uriah's wife in private, but your wives will be taken out in public, and everybody will know that your wives are taken by other men or whatever. And then it will fall to your child to pay for this sin. Now, this is where my favorite part ends completely. I think it's a very creative way to, number one, introduce parables for teaching tools into literature. This is where it starts. It doesn't end here. Of course, we know there's a lot in the Gospels, but I love a parable for a teaching moment. And I love the way that David is contrite. Now, he becomes even more contrite. So he's very convicted that he's caused God displeasure. He becomes even more contrite when it looks as if the child that Bathsheba has born from his union with her is going to die. And indeed, that child does die. And it sort of looks like the servants are on tiptoes, walking on eggshells around David as the child gets ill. He fasts, he prays, he's desperate for this child to be saved. But, everyone knows what he did and what Nathan the prophet said. So, what's the point? But he thought there would be a chance. So as soon as he realizes that the child dies, he goes back to eating. And they question him about that. They say, "Well, why did you just go back to eating?" And he's like, "Well, what point is it fasting? The child's dead." So I don't understand a lot about where that comes from. But that is really, really sad that there's scripture for the emotions around the loss of a child. Now, the loss of the child is directly related in the story to God causing this. And that's the part that I'm not that comfortable with. But what I think is useful in this passage is the relatability of a parent who is just desperate to pray their child into restored health. And that doesn't happen. So, and we take a moment to just lament with David and Bathsheba about that child's life. The theological understanding is that it is punishment for the act that David did in taking Bathsheba as his wife while her husband was still alive, and then killing her husband. But it's really not the child's fault. I mean, it's a horrible story. It's a horrible story. It's a tough thing to face. But it's in there. That's part 2. Part 3 is the birth of Solomon, who is the second child that is born from Bathsheba and David's union. And Solomon, of course, the payment's been paid, I suppose. So Solomon is beloved of God, and of course, we know that he is the heir to the throne now. I don't know why. He's dead last in the birth order, as far as we know, and he's beloved of God. So Solomon is born of Bathsheba and David in part 3 of chapter 12. In part 4 of chapter 12, there is another battle. There is the sacking of Rabath, the water city. And Joab goes up there and he's like, we got to get this place. This stuff is off the hook. We got to have it. It's going to be our spoils. And wait till you see the crown that the king wears. And so it's described in there that the crown was very heavy, it was gold, and it has not a diadem or a diamond. It has a gem in it, a jewel in it, a stone, it says in my translation. And so it's fancy, and David puts it on his head. And then all the people that live in that city, he puts them to work and makes money off their bodies, I suppose, with, giving them iron tools and different things. So there's more commerce there for the Israelites, and a great get. I don't know why that's included in that chapter, but it doesn't relate at all to the previous 2 paragraphs or sections. The others do. They relate to each other. But we have this little... Oh, and by the way, while David was doing all this nefarious stuff and being convicted of his sin, he was also sacking the water city so that he could have a big fat crown. So there is the parable of Nathan, the death of the first child, the birth of Solomon, and the acquisition of the water city, Rabath. I hope you have a beautiful rest of the day.